it says in Genesis 47 verse 20, "And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's, and as the people he removed them to cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof." Okay, so you notice he's removing them. Okay, and all this plays out in the antitype. Okay, and so that's verse 20 and 21 talk about him removing all the Egyptians. Okay, he's removing people. Okay, and it says from one end to the other, and we see in the antitype a similar situation happening. What we see is actually Acts 8 verse 1. It says, "And Saul consented to his death, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad through the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles." Okay, so I want you to see that there was a scattering of the people, and recorded in Acts chapter 8, and this was typified by Joseph in Genesis 47 verse 20 and 21, removing all the people from one end to the other. Okay, one end of Egypt to the other. And we see here in Acts it was except the apostles, just like we see in Genesis 47:22. "Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned to them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave. Wherefore they sold not their lands." So I want you to notice that the priests here, the same thing happened to them as did the apostles. Joseph bought the land of everyone else and moved everyone, scattered the people, but not the priests. Just as in Acts, you see the people being scattered, but not the apostles. Okay, so this is again showing you that what happened in the days of Joseph is a type for what happened in the days of Christ. Okay, and there are more things which are involved in that, but I'm going to skip over a few things for the sake of time. Okay, and because I want you all to take this and study it for yourself, and you can get into more detail at that time. So we're going to notice the next important thing that will take place. But first I just want to point out one more thing about what we just read. What we read was the scattering of the apostolic church, save the apostles. Okay, but what I want you to notice is that throughout time they were scattered more and more into the Dark Ages. Okay, and during the Dark Ages the Church of God was scattered. And we see this recorded in Daniel and Revelation. We see this recorded. Zechariah 6 actually covers the same period. But what we have is a period of Dark Ages being brought in into which the church was scattered. Okay, and we recognize that as being ending in 1798, or the period, at least ending in the sense of the Dark Ages were covering that period of time, coming up to 1798. And so what we're going to see is that after there was a scattering in the days of Joseph, we also have what we call a formation taking place, okay, or a reorganization, we could call it. So in Genesis 45, verse 10 and 11, we're told, "And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen," okay, and you know who this is talking about, right? Because it's talking about Joseph's family coming back in. "And thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and the flocks, or thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nurse thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household, and all that thou hast, come to poverty." Okay? So notice that this is not at the beginning of the famine anymore. It's a little bit later on, showing that this is no longer the beginning of the Christian era, but it is later on. And it says here, I'm just going to jump forward a little bit, Genesis 26, verse 27, and the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. Okay, so how many is 70? Does anybody here know? 70 in the Bible. The King James language, 70 is 70. Okay, because a score is 20, so 70, or 20 times 3 is 60, and 10 is 70. So we have 70 souls being brought in to Egypt, okay, or coming on the scene of the world. What I want you to notice as well is that this was Israel, okay? So there was a scattering, but Israel ended up coming to Egypt, and there were 70 souls. Now, 70 in the Bible is a specific type. It's not a number that you see very often, but when you see it, it's always referring to a very similar situation. For example, Exodus 1, which we already read a similar situation, but it says, Exodus 1, verse 5, and all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. Okay, so it talks about the 70 souls of Jacob's loins going into Egypt. We're also told in Numbers 11, verse 16, and the Lord said unto Moses, gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom thou knowest to be the elders of the children, and officers over them, and bring them unto the tabernacle of the congregation, that they may stand there with thee. So you see that as a leadership they had 70 men. You see these 70 men in Ezekiel 8, verse 11, and remember that the Sanhedrin was made up of 70 men. And you also have in Luke 10, verse 1, after these things the Lord appointed other 70 also, and sent them 2 and 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. So you see here that 70, it's always been used as a symbol for the church organization. In other words, in the days of Jacob and Joseph, you see the 70 souls going into Egypt, and that was God's church on the earth at that time. And there was 70 souls, the organization of the church. Now you see also when they left Egypt, about actually 215 years later, when they left Egypt, you see that they had, in Numbers 11, they had appointed 70 men, okay? And those men, or that formation of 70 men, ended up becoming the Sanhedrin Council, or the church organization. Then also, again, you see Christ did it in Luke 10, where he had the 70 disciples as his church organization. So 70 is always a symbol of church organization. And so antitypically speaking, when you see Jacob and the house of Jacob entering Egypt, it's talking about a church organization coming on the scene. Now, since the scattering of God's people lasted all the way at least till 1798, then the church organization must be something after that. And since we know that the Millerites did not have a formal church organization, it cannot be referring to them. But rather, it must be the church which is symbolized properly with a leader such as Jacob. Okay. Now we have Jacob in the Bible. I want you to notice that the name Jacob is actually the same as the name James. You see James in the New Testament, the book of James. The word there is the same for Jacob. Okay. And so we, as Seventh-day Adventists, know that we have James White being a key figure in the early leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He could be called the father of Israel today. Notice as well that according to early writings, page 15, Ellen White's first vision was concerning the 144,000, okay? And the 144,000 are, in fact, the 12 tribes, as described in Revelation 7. And since Jacob was the father of the 12 tribes, then we must have the Seventh-day Adventist Church, with the founders being the fathers of the 12 tribes today, or in other words, the 144,000. And so this church organization can only be in reference to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay? Does that make sense to everyone? I hope it does. If not, we have information that we can send you to further clarify this point. But one other reason why we know that this is true is the place where they were sent. And we already read it, but I'm going to read again Genesis 45 verse 10, which says, "And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks and thy herds, and all that thou hast." Okay, so they went into Goshen. And I want you to notice that Goshen was a part of Egypt, and when I say Egypt, remember, it's the world. It was the most productive part of Egypt at that time. It was the richest, most productive, and what we're going to see is that it must be a symbol for the place in the world, or the antitypical Egypt, that is richest and most productive in our day. Okay? Now, when I say our day, I'm referring to the time in which this organization came about. The most promising place to be in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s was the United States of America, which would be the antitypical Goshen. So the Adventist Church was set up there, okay, in the antitypical Goshen, or the United States. Now, we're also told that, and we already read it, Joseph said that he'll be near to you, and he'll nourish you, he'll take care of you. Now, and he'll, nourishing or feeding is another way of putting that. So we have that in the beginning of the church, the Adventist Church, Joseph, or Christ, nourished us greatly with much spiritual food, more so than we had received ever since the days of the apostles. So, we have in 1845, which is, we could call that the beginning of the Adventist Church, since that's when we really came into the understanding of the Sabbath. Joseph has been giving us an abundance of food ever since. Keep in mind, there has been a time of spiritual fasting, so to speak, but and spiritual famine, we could call it as well. But he has been giving the Seventh-day Adventist Church, nourishing us greatly with an abundance of food, just as Joseph did to Jacob and the house of Jacob at the time that they came into Egypt. I want you to notice as well, Genesis 47 verse 3, it says, "And Joseph said and Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers." So shepherds, meaning ones who take care of the flock. Now, Seventh-day Adventists at the beginning, we would say that all Seventh-day Adventists are missionaries. That's how it was at the beginning. We were all there to take care of the sheep. We were caring. We were wanting to go and bring the word to people. We were missionaries, right? And so this is typified by the shepherds of Joseph's day. And next we see an unfortunate event, but one that came about nonetheless. In Exodus 1, verse 8, it says, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph." So remember, the king of Egypt is Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh who knew